time. There's time for them to see that Ollie is going to slip on the banana skin, then he does it with great elegance. And this use of the banana skin, I think, is a very modern reaction against authority.
Marshal Tito has a large library of their films.
They're kept by the Vatican.
Winston Churchill was one of their fans.
And Joseph Stalin another.
During 1929, the year of the Great Crash and the Depression, 14 Laurel and Hardy films were released, some of their best. It was the beginning of their vintage period, the short 20-minute comedies. Were they the suckers, never given an even break, but somehow always winning in the end? Were they just plain funny to look at? Or was there perhaps something more to it?
If you go back for centuries, the king who ran a country had to have a pressure valuation moment where he would call the court jester. When the chips are down, that's who they call. That's where they go.
Come in. How do you feel? Fine. I didn't expect to see you here today. Well, I didn't have anything else to do, so I thought I'd drop in and see you. Thank you. You're welcome. What have you got there? I brought you some hard-boiled eggs and some nuts.
Now, you know I can't eat hard-boiled eggs and nuts. If you wanted to bring me something, why didn't you bring me a box of candy?
Well, they cost too much.
Well, what has that got to do with it?
You didn't pay me for the last box I brought you. Have one?
No, I'd rather not. Hard-boiled eggs and nuts.
There were two strange angels with different weights dealing with human folly. There was never hate. There was never bitterness. They just showed us how life is and what a farce it can be.
How long do you think I'll be in here, Doctor?
Oh, at least a couple of months.
Gee, that's great. This is the first time in my life I've had such a wonderful rest.
It begins always, Stan said, and must begin always from some little episode which is based in reality and conceivably could happen.
This is all very human. We all go through it. All they did was to point it up a little bit. I actually executed a complete Laurel and Hardy turn a few years ago. A woman who lives near here had an enormous packing case, and I helped her to unpack it.
I'll get it out.
And in the course of doing so, I put my foot straight onto a nail about so long. I then behaved exactly like Hardy. I gave a wild howl of anguish. I jumped about on one foot, and I suddenly realized that I was being like Hardy, and instead of, being in agony, which I was, I forgot about the whole thing, and I haven't laughed so much for years.
They're just like a couple of kids coping with a world of enormous objects. which are permanently hostile to them.
Can you tell me the last time in your entire life that you thought of what the man goes through who indeed delivers a piano to someone? You couldn't care less. All you want to get is the pleasure of the sound of that piano, but you don't care how it got there. Stan didn't want to hear about those that enjoyed the sound of the piano. He wanted to know the man that delivered it to that apartment on the 7th floor, and how the hell did he get it there.
To me, it was never the objects. It was always the incredible people who were doing it. A man who would say, quite reasonably, I can't talk to you for a moment, he would say to the person on the other end of the phone, my ear is full of milk.
Who is it? It's a lady about the trip. Oh. Just a minute, my friend Mr. Hardy will speak to you.
Hello? Excuse me, please. My ear is full of milk. Brush that off.
Gradually, there comes under it all a kind of a beautiful simplicity, and it is also a reflection of the two men as men. They were, of course, to say the least of it, hardly their screen selves off-screen, but that innocence was certainly there. They were not devious men at all. They had a basic and beautiful simplicity to them, and they had an innocence. And however one defines gentlemanliness, they had it in depth.
Places, everybody. Quiet, please. Quiet!
Oh, what a wonderful sight.
Lights are ready!
Sound is ready.
Action! Camera!
Tank, an army surplus, did much of the job when the old Hal Roach studios were demolished in 1963 to make way for a car showroom. Culver City seems like the set of a shantytown that could be dismantled overnight. Miraculously, most of it still looks as it must have looked in the early 1930s, at the heyday of the Hal Roach studios. Every so often, the whole team went out to this street corner to shoot exteriors.
The pie factory is still there, from where in 1927 a total day's output was purchased to facilitate the shooting of the Battle of the Century. 4,000 pies.
And near Los Angeles, by the Silver Lake, the famous steps are still there, where in 1932 they shot The Music Box, the film by which they're perhaps best remembered.
I went out to Stan Laurel's apartment in Santa Monica, and he was, you know, quite old at the time, and it was absolutely fantastic because he remembered with absolute clarity practically every film they'd ever made and all the details of it. And it was a sort of ridiculous afternoon. We fed each other with, you know, and do you remember that sequence in such and such? And then howls of laughter. And he said, yes, but do you remember so-and-so? And there we were, falling about laughing like a couple of kids for hours and hours and hours. And he remembered everything.
One could almost speak of a Laurel and Hardy stock company.
Jimmy Finlayson, #1 foil to Laurel and Hardy.
Mae Bush, homicidal widow.
Billy Gilbert.
Charlie Hall, foil #2.
Walter Long, a villain.
Jean Harlow, then quite unknown, appeared in one of their silent shorts.
It was fun. It was a ball. I had a ball all the time I was with them. I didn't realize I was working. It was just downright fun.
During the late 1950s, a great many of the old Laurel and Hardy films had reappeared on television. And Stan, in his old age, often watched them. They brought him back something of the old popularity, but with a new audience.
I had to play the character, kind of Dulcie, kind of a bumangina, you know. And I'm engaged to marry Ollie, and I tell my father I'm going to be married, and he nearly falls apart. And I call Ollie up, and I said, oh, terrible things happened. And I'm crying on the phone, and he says, well, we'll elope. Don't you worry, Dulcie, darling. And I said, oh, how romantic.
How romantic.
Now listen, Dulcie, darling. You be ready to elope at midnight and leave the rest to me.
Oh, Oliver.
Goodbye, ducky lover.
Goodbye, devil dumpling.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
It was fun because it was hard. We really, we worked very hard, and my face got all pushed out of shape several times, and I got my foot clear up in the air, you know, getting into the thing. And it was hard, but it was fun.
Oh!
Finally, everything is loaded, and we give a burp, and the car goes up in the air.
And Stan would laugh. He laughed really hardly, but never at Stan Laurel. He laughed at Hardy. And he would say, while the pictures were running, wasn't he funny? Wasn't he a funny man?
The cameras would just line up on him, and the director would say start. They would think of a piece of business. And they could have done the whole 28 minutes or 30 minutes just on that one scene. He'd never holler cut. The only way they'd finally cut would be that the crew would break up. Every little thing, they could pick up a little piece of business and make a 20-minute scene out of it.
La da 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 dee da 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 dum. Pom pom. La da da dee da dum dum dee dee dee. Pom 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 pom.
Stan never much thought about going out beyond a tremendously effective gag, and simply considering, as a music-hall artist would, the beauty of the gag and the way that the laughter be controlled and brought up and built and structured. No matter what he talked about,